One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Coach Glenn Caruso. Coach Caruso is the head football coach at University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. Greetings, Coach. Thanks for being back on the show.
Awesome to be here, Ty. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Coach, I always love having you. You're pretty philosophical, and I like the way your brain works here.
Thank you.
Well, Coach, you're in your 12th season as head coach there at St. Thomas. Last year, you ended with a total at St. Thomas of 118 wins. Of course, you want to keep that going type situation. What I have you on and what I want to talk to you about is, in this past year, the Minnesota Intercollegiate Athletics Conference decided that they would, for the lack of a better word, remove St. Thomas from the conference, which was interesting from those on the outside looking in, watching it. Don't necessarily want to get into specifics of that and their thinking. What I want to know, though, and let me give you some preface. I was at Michigan State when Coach Saban called us to a meeting, 6 o'clock in the morning, and told us that he was going to take the job down at LSU. For some of us, it was news. I think some of us had been paying attention to ESPN maybe, but it was a lot different then. This was back in 99. And the shock of a coach is leaving, like, wow, like he's really going to take another job. He explained to us those things, and he was pretty sad that he was leaving. Like, you could tell he was disappointed. But it interests me in this type of transition. Now student athletes are in the know. They know everything that's happening, could potentially happen. And I wonder about your communication with the student athletes while this thing was going on. How did you keep them in the loop in addition to what they were probably hearing on social media or in the news?
Well, and I think to preface that, I think it's important, they don't know everything that's happening. I don't know everything that's happening,
exactly
but
right.
Maybe the idea that there's information out there that you can probably find just about to validate anything you want nowadays is probably even more scary than anything else. So, we're an open book. We're pretty straightforward, and sort of what you see is what you get. So we don't sugarcoat things. When something comes up in a program, we speak very directly with our kids, frankly, because we love them the same way that Rachel and I are going to speak to our 3 children. It's going to be no different no matter what the scenario is. But when this all started to occur, it was actually just after they had gone home or right at the end of finals week. So we're not too hung up on, let's talk about what all the possibilities are. That's not what we do. We're set up to focus on things we can control. We worked hard over 12 years to be process oriented and focus on those things that we can control. And we've been pretty good, I think, throughout the decade plus at making sure that we don't waste time, effort, or energy focusing on things that is not within our means or our hands. So it really wasn't as huge a departure, I think, from the way we normally operate.
Norm, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I think, probably, you had this big meeting, you did all these things. We get up every morning, we work, we put ourselves second for the greater good of the team, and we'll continue to do that until the day that we graduate or the day that I pass away. So that's really all we did, is we just took another step that day and moved forward.
Have any of the guys come into school, come into camp, we're working on this thing. Obviously, they understand. They're part of the culture there at St. Thomas, which is a great one. But do any of them raise any questions? Coach, tell me about this. How does this make you feel or anything like that? I mean, any type of one-on-one personal questions with the guy, like leadership on the team kind of thing?
And there's tremendous leadership on the team, but it's tremendous because it's focused on what's happening now. So, no, to answer your question, we haven't had one-off conversations about possibilities or anything like that. May there be a time for that down the road? Of course. Is that time right now? No, that's not the time for it right now. But that's one of the things that makes me not only proud but grateful for the type of team we have, is they're focused on being as good as they can today and trying to get better tomorrow and win a football game. That's it.
Yeah, I wonder about that. You talk about it's basically you create the habits to have a good culture, and the habit you're talking about that you get into when football, throughout the year, specifically when football season comes. I wonder about the communication between you and the athletics director as this goes down, because your name was in the news a lot. Obviously, he he comes in the last year, right? And this is something that's on his plate, which he's kind of cut out to handle this type of thing. Just the communication between you two. From what I know about both of you guys, have developed a pretty good relationship in the time that he's been there.
Well, Phil Esten is, he's a blessing to me personally. I think he's an absolute blessing to the school. For us to have someone who has his leadership and vision and abilities to go through a tough time. I mean, anyone can go through simple times, right? The easy times, that's nothing. But for us to have Phil lead us and guide us is pretty awesome. We're in a situation where I think right now, I'm extremely drilled down and focused on trying to build young men right now to coach a football season after that. So, but Phil's been very open and honest with everything, which is one of the reasons why, we're very fortunate to have him. I think it speaks to maybe the St. Thomas overall brand that a team that's afflicted in this manner actually has opportunities. And so that's not something that, I am not going to be the next athletic director. I've never wanted to be the next athletic director. Yeah. And so let me make that really clear. That's not in my backyard. So I will definitely let the people who are eminently qualified to handle that. And that is not Glenn Caruso. I promise you.
Well, so I wonder on a broader scale, Coach, beyond the Minnesota Intercollegiate Athletics Conference, you and I have been through many things. And, of course, I have a couple mantras, right? But one of them is the key to a peaceful existence is to master the ability to adjust accordingly. And as a coach and a head coach for a long time and a coach for just a coach period for even longer, a father, when you talk about adjusting accordingly, this is something that you are well attuned to, right? And then you talk about coming into a football season, whether it's this season, last season, any season. What is the mentality of a great leader when you have to face adversity coming into a season? You got to get back in your habits with things that are on the back of your mind, but you need to focus forward.
Sure. And, you're right. You and I have been through a lot over probably almost a decade now. And one of the things that I value greatly when we get a chance to talk, and it's few and far in between, but when we do, I remember last time we talked about peace or rational thought. It's not the absence of the storms, right? It's the calm in the midst of them. And so it's kind of like a great running back catching a screen pass. He has his back to the guys that are all trying to tackle him. And what does he do? He doesn't catch the ball, turn around and go. He catches the ball. Even though there's 11 guys trying to hit him real hard, he turns around, he makes an assessment and evaluation as a calm leader in the midst of the storm, and then he goes. And I think that's, a lot of people on a bit of a tangent maybe, but a lot of people are trying to eliminate stressors by eliminating any sort of pressure coming into their life. Life is pressure. That's what it is. So we don't want to try and not risk appropriately. We don't want to try and eliminate pressure. We want to try and, as you said earlier, having great habits so that when we're in the midst of a storm, we can handle those efficiently, effectively, and rationally. St. Thomas has, in my opinion, from what I've seen, has always seemed to do that. Phil Esten has always seemed to do that in the decade that I've been following him in his career. So for me to be able to sit here, I'm not being asked to navigate some sort of uncharted waters. I'm simply being asked to operate the way that we've been fortunate enough to operate. But I do think that a lot of people probably put themselves in a worse situation in the midst of the storm because they self-sabotage. They put monsters in their head, right? And for us to realize, I think perspective is something you and I often talk about, and I think that's important. For us to realize that there's a lot of tough and difficult things that have happened to both you and myself and everybody who's listening in our lives. And if we truly reflect back, take maybe personally the death of a parent when I'm 8 years old. Now, I wouldn't go back to 1982 and wish it on myself again, but let's not at least recognize that there are some positive effects, some unintended consequences that, although I wouldn't want to have to go through it again, there are some positives to it. So if you look back at your experience and realize, okay, not everything is 100% horrible. And not everything is 100% utopia. A lot of it is, quite frankly, how you deal with it when you're in that storm.
Right. The adjusting accordingly. One thing I've seen from my experience working with the Football Coaches Association, now my experience working closely with athletics directors and the people I've gotten to know well, such as yourself, is that the internal dialogue, right? The introspection is very important, especially when you're either going through something, the celebrations or the challenges. Talk to me a little bit about, this thing was earlier this year when they made this announcement, some of the internal dialogue you had with yourself as you were preparing. You still got to keep the habits up. You still got to keep the culture. But were there any internal questions, introspection that you had throughout the year, I guess?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, even when things are as smooth sailing as it gets, I always have internal angst and questions. I'm not saying it's the healthiest way to go. I am saying I'm my father's son, and that's how we have continually reevaluated and intuitively recalculated every scenario. And I was taught at a really young age that you got to win in the margins. You got to try and be the best version of yourself you can be, and don't really focus on someone else, right? I mean, comparison is the thief of joy. And so we try hard, even though I'm like everybody else. In my mind, when I wake up, on every morning, there's probably between 6 and 10 things that are going through my head that by the time I drive to work a half hour later, I better have straight, because you're always wondering this or that. But I think that's human nature. At least it's my human nature. What I think my wife specifically has done an amazing job with is I'm always, what's next? Those habits of looking forward. And my wife, Rachel, she says to me routinely, she says, Glenn, don't wish away today. So what she's saying to me is, today's a blessing, it's a gift, and don't be so forward thinking that you can't be yourself right now. Whether it's enjoying it or whether it's working through a storm is fairly irrelevant. But that's how I get myself back to a grounded state, is when I do wake up and all these thoughts are going through my head, I look at it and I say, well, what can we rationally and realistically affect? What is the biggest return on our investment for time? And that's how I try and maybe silence some of the inner dialogue that when I wake up in the morning is yelling in my head.
Don't be so forward thinking that you miss the opportunity to be successful today, pretty much is what she said to you. That's interesting.
There's no question. And, it really hit home. I mean, many people that listen to the podcast or that follow our program know that my wife, Rachel, was diagnosed with colorectal cancer 2 years ago, and she was fighting that. So it really comes to a head, and it really personifies what she has been preaching to me for the last 20 years is today is a blessing. I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, but don't wish away today. Now, that doesn't mean leave everything up to fate. We still work ridiculously hard, but it does mean that if we can't take the time to catch that ball on the screen and turn around and make an assessment, good, bad, or otherwise, then we're probably not truly living in the moment. And if we're not living in this moment, what moment are we living in?
Right. Of course, that's what I assume, as you said, is your approach to this whole thing that's going on now in St. Thomas, the whole, in general, football season. And really just being a coach and a leader and a father as well, Coach. That's why I like talking to you, Coach.
Well, and you know what? You always challenge me in a beautiful way when we have an opportunity to talk and share books we're reading. And I do think that my dad said to me at a young age, Glenn, you can only be one person. You don't have the time, or you're not going to be smart enough to be three different people. So figure out the one you want to be, and then be it, whether you're a father, whether you're a husband, whether you're coaching. And then that way you don't have to worry about doing anything else other than just being yourself. So the fact that you take the time on your podcast to recognize that these core tenets that we are learning and teaching in sport are really the same core tenets that we're teaching and learning to become great people. I mean, I think at the end of the day, Ty, I think that's probably why we're still involved in sport. Even though we're 40 years old, I think that's probably why, because we value that. And thank you very much for highlighting that on the podcast, because in an age all the more devoted to style over substance, not everybody does that. And that's why I'm grateful.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, Coach. I really, really definitely appreciate you joining us here on One Question.
Have a wonderful day, Ty.
That was Coach Glenn Caruso. He's the head football coach at University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. And of course, this is Ty Brown with one question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.